of the mobile game that we're going to be making. Today we will add shooting for the project. So yeah, let's get on with it. So first thing we want to do is actually, before we start, there are some changes I want to check and change in the camera. And I just want to change it to a solid color. It looks a little bit more like a sky would actually look like within the project. So what we want to do now is just go into our scripts and start working on the player shooting class we've created in the previous episode, but obviously didn't populate. So actually, before we do that, let's create a brand new script and let's call it pulling. So what is pulling? Pulling is a way of making projectiles spawn without actually having to, without having to constantly create them. It's something that's really important to have for a mobile game, as you want to conserve as many resources as you possibly can. So what we're going to have here is we're going to have a serializable field, private, and that's going to be the game object. So that's going to be the object to spawn for our pool. And we will have another serializable, which is going to be private integer, and this is going to be the amount pool. So this is how many objects we can pull at the start, which we can set to something like 10. Then we're going to have a private list of type game object, as that will store all of our objects to pull. So that's going to be our pulled objects, like so. And then alternatively, we could have actually another serializable field, which is private pool can grow. And this will check, actually let's set it to true by default, and this will check whenever or not we can grow our objects in case we have less available than we can spawn. So let's now go into start and just do pull object is equal to new list of game object. And what we'll do here is we'll do for each pull amount, we basically just spawn instantiate this object. So all we're going to do is do game object. We're going to cast it, so we will have game object. Actually, let's cast it out. Yeah, so we're going to have a game object. Let's call it go, and we'll do instantiate, and we're going to instantiate our object to spawn as a game object. Now, there you go. Now it's not necessary to have any specific position for this, so that actually doesn't matter. Let me just double check if my voice works. Yes, it does. But yes, so we want to instantiate the object. Now we want to add the game object to our list, so we'll do objects to spawn dot add, and there's our list pulled objects dot add, and we're going to add our go, and we want to set go dot set active to false because we don't want it to be visible to the player. And then after we do this, well, with this actually the pulling is created. All we really need to do is just create a way to grab the object. So we do public game object and just type in get pulled object. And this is what we're going to call every time we want to grab the object. So grabs the pulled object for the player to use. And this creates the objects pool like so. And now that we have this, what we do is we loop through our lists. So we do dot count, and we just check if our pulled objects at I, and then active in hierarchy, like this, and then we just returned the pulled object at I, like so. Now here we just put return null, like so. And then of course we also have our little can grow, but we'll just deal with that a little bit later. Let's move on to the next part real quick, and that is shooting of our actual object. So what do we need to shoot? Well, we will need to have, of course, some kind of a bullet, and a lot of values that can handle it. So first, let's create a new prefab. Well, actually, the player is currently not a prefab, but let's make a new 2D object of type sprite, and then let's attach our player bullet to it. Now that we have this, let's add a box collider 2D. Now, something that we need is for collisions to take place, we need to have a rigid body. So we're going to add a rigid body 2D to our player, but we'll also add it to our enemies as well. And we will be changing from dynamic to kinematic. And that's because we don't want our objects to fall out of the game world. So we still have that movement, but our object doesn't fall outside of the map. Now that we have this, let's just call this player, let's just call it bullet for now, like so. Now for our bullet script, we want the bullets to do something as well, so we can quickly just set up how the bullet works. So let's go into scripts and create a new script called bullet. And let's go back to our bullet again. We will set bullet to on is trigger, and we will attach the bullet script to it like this. Now for our bullet, there are several values that we need for it to contain, and it's going to be a float of type speed. Let's just set it as something like 5 and actually make it serializable so we can modify it. So how fast the bullet travels. Now that we have this now, all we really need to do is create an update function, and this will do controls the movement of the bullet. And what we're going to do here is the transform.position is equal to transform.position plus our speed, and then times time.delta time, times, and then we need the position. So I believe transform.up should do the job. If not, we'll see what we need to change it to. I believe, what is this, y? Let's see. So there you go. The bullet does fly straight up, which is perfect. Now let's have a look at the player now. So this is our player. Now we're going to add something to it, and that's going to be an empty game object. And this is going to be called a muzzle. So this is the point from which we fire the bullet, and we're going to place it a little bit in front of a player. Now, to make it a little bit more visible, we are going to use the little symbol here for it. And what's essentially going to happen is the bullets will instantiate from this point onwards and fly up straight. So anyways, let's go and create our prefabs folder so we have access to so that our bullet can become a prefab. And let's grab it and drag it in here. Now we can remove it from the scene, and we can go here. Now for now we'll do instantiation, and then we'll start pulling the object. So for now, let's just do private game object, and that's going to be our bullet prefab like this. Oh no, it's wrong script. Now we'll come back to the bullet script shortly because there is more that we need to add. But this is it for now. So this is the reference to bullet that needs to be spawned like so. Now, since we can shoot, that means we'll have some kind of a rate of fire. So let's create another serializable field, and it's going to be rate of fire. Later, it won't be accessible, and that will be dependent on the ship that we use, I guess, of type float. Let's just set it to something like 0.5 for now. And now let's create two more values that will not be serializable. So first will be private float elapsed time since firing, and we'll set that to 0. And we'll have a private bool is trigger down, like this. Now with these set up, now let's try to get our inputs. So let's create an update function, and let's do if input dot get axis, and let's just, what can we use for, which axis can we use for this? Of course, this will be changed later as we will find a different way to fire in the actual game. Where are we? Input manager. This is where, yeah, I know that there is a new input system, but again, we won't be using input system that extensively. So let's just use fire one, which is Mars 0 button. So we'll just do fire one in here. And then let's make it equal to 1, because that means it's in its press state. And what will happen then is our trigger will set to true. And then else, of course, trigger is set to false, like so. Now, next thing that we can do is if is ready to fire. Oh, actually, that's not a value that we have set up yet. So next thing we need to do is we need to check the elapsed time against whenever we can shoot or not. Or actually, let's not do that just yet. Let's do it the easiest way. So if our trigger is triggered down, we can create a bullet, but we actually also have to elapse our where are we? Yeah, actually, let's create a new boolean. It'll be easier that way. So bool is ready to fire. So if, and before we do is trigger, we'll do if is trigger and is ready to fire. So if both of these statements are true, we can then create a bullet and then we can fire it. And now that I think about it, we're missing one more reference, which is our muzzle. So let's get that now. So private transform, and that's going to be our muzzle, like this. So where the bullet will be created at, how often we can shoot. There we go. So if this and this is ready, then what we do is we just do a game object, and let's call it bullet, and then is equal to instantiate, and then what we instantiate is our bullet prefab, like this, and then we just do bullet.transform.position is equal to our muzzle.transform.position. We want to do the exact same for the rotation, so we'll do bullet.transform.rotation is equal to muzzle.transform.rotation, and then now that we've prepared everything, we make it set to true. So we do bullet dot, actually the bullet will be active because we're not pulling just yet. So once pulling is added, set bullet to true here, like so. I'm getting slightly ahead of myself already. And then here is where we set ready to fire is equal to you false. And elapsed since firing is also going to be a 0. Of course, we're not using it just yet, but we will soon. So we have our if statement here, and now we will have our else. So let's just do a debug.log has fired, and here we'll have is unable to fire. Let's try and give this a little go. So now we should be able to shoot once, and at that point the game will prevent us from shooting again. So now that we have this, let's go into scripts and add shooting into our scripts. And I'm just gonna move this up so it's right next to the player movement. And what we want to do is we want to drag in our muzzle and we want to drag in our bullet in here. Now that we have this, we are constantly unable to fire. Actually, what are these set to by default? They're set to default to false by default. So let's default both of these to true. I think it would be easier to see. There you go. So we fired once and now we are no longer able to shoot. I'm actually going to make these serializable for the sake of testing. So what's going to happen is once we do shoot, we will then start doing an elapsed fire and we'll keep adding time.delta time to it. And then if our elapsed time since firing is going to be higher than our rate of fire, I believe, then we will set our ready to fire back to true. So that will allow us to fire a next shot. Let's change this to something like A2. And let's actually, where are we? And let's actually set this to visible as well, so we can observe everything that we do throughout the project. Where are we? So now we can see everything. We start. All of the values are set. Actually, this is incorrect here because our elapse keeps adding, but it shouldn't be adding. It should be only adding if so. Let's think about it. So if it is not ready to fire, right? Because we don't have to hold the button to be able to shoot, but we should be resetting that function there. So now let's inspect again, and it looks all right. So now we shoot. It reset, lets us shoot again, and every time we do, it fires. Also, I was meant to change that to a higher number. So if we go back to even a smaller one, we can keep firing it fast, we can keep holding it, so we don't have to keep tapping. And with this, we have a very simple script, but of course we now have loads of bullets that appear on the screen, which is slightly problematic. So before we do that, let's now use our pulling script instead, so we don't have to modify the code that much. And let's get rid of these debug.logs as we no longer need them. So to change our current system to use the pulling script, first we have to attach our pulling script somewhere. Now, ideally, we would add our pulling script to the character, but we might have some other types of bullet, but we are unsure how we're going to handle the pulling for now. So let's just create a new game object and let's call it pulled bullets. We will probably change this later to something else, and we're just going to add a pulling here and add our bullet here. With this done, we change this to pulling instead. And this will give us some errors that we need to change, because right now, rather than instantiating, we simply just do bullet prefab.get pulled object like this, and everything else stays the same. But of course, we did have this little comment here, so we have to do bullet.set active, and we just set it to true, like so. Now let's give this a try. Of course, we didn't attach anything into our missing area. There we go. And now the bullets are firing. Of course, we'll get a first error now because we've activated all of our pulls, which is a problem. Actually, there is something there. It doesn't look too good in the hierarchy. So now let's make the bullet grow. Where are we? So here, rather than returning null, we will just do a quick one here. So rather than returning null, what we'll do is if can grow, and then else. So if we get to the else, we'll still return nothing. But if we can grow, we will return a new instantiation. So we will do this in here. And we will just do return, and we will be returning go like this. So now we can grow successfully. Now, because of how we are doing this, we might as well just make a new function for this so we don't replicate it. Let's call this private void create bullet, create pulled object, and this creates a new pulled instance of the object, like so. And we're going to paste this in here. We're going then to remove it from here and do create pulled object, like so. Of course, this doesn't have a return type, but we are creating something in there. So let's think of a workaround to be able to receive an object. I believe since we're adding, we could just do return this, or we could return a newest object that was added to our list. So we'll do pulled objects dot count. So we'll do pulled objects and at position pulled objects dot count, like so. Now let's give this a try, see how it's going to work out. So there we go, and we are getting an error. So we are creating them. I believe this might be -1. Just a quick mathematical problem. Yes, it has to be -1 because if array starts from 0. There you go. And now we don't have any errors. Of course, if we keep firing, we'll have limitless amounts of enemies, and there's many ways in which we can fix it. Firstly, we can have some kind of object that could block the area. So for example, we could have some kind of bounds system at the end of each point, like this. So we could have, there we go, we could have something like this, bounds. Let's just remove this and put box collider 2D instead. Just reset that to 0. This is and the bounds could have their own tag. So let's call this the map edge. And what would happen is in the bullet, we are going to actually extend the bullet script, and we'll do on trigger enter 2D. And of course, that also means that bounds need their own rigid body, which is not a problem. So let's add rigid body 2D. Set this to kinematic. And we'll do if collision dot transform dot tag is equal to, where are we? A map edge And then we just want to disable this object. So we'll do this dot. So yeah, this dot game object dot set active, and we're just going to set it to false. So that's the very first thing that we can do to prevent too many bullets from spawning. Let's give this a try. So let's fire some bullets, and as we see now they keep disabling, so we essentially keep reusing the same amount of bullets, which is great because we never have to pull more. So that's one way, but what if a bullet sometimes escapes our little area? We could create another way of handling this, which would be just a simple counting system, which counts up, and if we reach a specific threshold, it will just disable this object. So let's create this as our another safe measure. So let's create two variables. First one is going to be our lifetime private. Actually, let's just create an invoking function for it instead. So let's create a onEnable, private void onEnable, and underneath it, let's create a function called private. Actually, at the bottom, let's create a function called private void destroy bullet. Now, in this destroy bullet, we will paste our disable script. So we'll do disables the bullet when it collides or fades away, and we will call destroy bullet here, and we will also onEnable do on an invoke function, which will call a destroy bullet after a specific amount of time. So let's do private let's do boolean. No, private float, and let's call this let's call it lifetime. So let's call this bullet lifetime, and let's set this to something like 5 seconds. So then here we need time, so that's going to be our bullet lifetime, and there you go. And if we have onEnable, we'll do private void on disable, where we just cancel this invoke, so it doesn't get cancel invoke. So we always call new invoke at the start rather than carrying on with the current one. This is just for safekeeping purposes. There we go, like this. And with this, we now have the way to enable and disable bullet after a specific amount of time. Now, there is one issue with this, and that's that invokes don't consider time.delta time. And that means that if we pause the game, the bullets will still destroy themselves, but this is something that we'll worry about in the future, and we'll just change this to a different system, maybe depending on how the game functions. So now, when the bullet should be destroyed if it exists in the scene for too long, initiates the destruction of the bullet after specified time, and this cancels the invoke of bullet destruction to properly reset the object. Like this, and this will be handles the collision of the bullet against other objects. And now that we have this, we probably want to do some collision checks against our enemies, but currently we don't have any enemies, so let's just create a enemy. We'll do this by going into 2D objects, creating a sprite, and now selecting our enemy object. Let's place an enemy slightly higher. Let's give him a rigid body 2D, same way we have it with our player. And let's give him a box collider 2D without selecting the trigger. Let's see, seems to be fit well. And let's give him a enemy tag. So we'll have enemy for enemy, and for our player, we will have a player tag. So let's name this enemy. Let's give him the enemy tag like this. And now that we have this, let's create a script for the enemy. So let's go into script. Let's create enemy. Now our enemies will have, well, there will be probably various enemies, but for now, let's give them some basic values that we might or might not use. So let's have a private float called health. Let's have private float movement speed. And let's have private float. What do we have here? We will have movement speed. We will have health. I think this is good enough for now, because all we essentially want to do for now is just take damage. So let's create a new function called public void take damage. In fact, this could be shared across player and the enemy, so we might rework how this works, but for now let's create something very, very simple. So else if collision.transform.tag is equal to enemy, then what we want to do is we want to do collision.transform.get component, and we want to find the enemy tag, and we just want to do take damage. For now, we will not pass anything, but what we will do here is we'll do this to transform this game object sect active false. So, and then make a comment here saying destroys the object if it gets shot by a bullet. Actually, we don't need these guys for now, because I don't plan on making enemies have any functionalities for now. We need to first decide what kind of a game this is going to be. Oh, I actually forgot to add the enemy to our script. And now that we have everything set up, let's see how we can shoot them. So there you go. If we hit them dead on, they disappear. Of course, now movement is slightly limited. It's not exactly at the edge. I'm just going to move this out for now. There we go. And with this, we have a very simple game that allows us to shoot essentially just triangles. And I'm really bad at moving bit by bit. There we go. So this is it for now. Just like in the previous parts, I will now close the project, and I will be uploading it to GitHub. And I'll be also uploading it to the new page on edge.io. So if I just quickly pull this up right now. So if I go into the dashboards, where are we? So this is currently what I have. It's an empty page, but I'll be including everything from today's session in here. And we'll be doing this bit by bit, day by day, series by series. Now that we've done this in here, what I'm going to write is what we've done today. And I'll be finishing off this series for tonight. Of course, now everything's bugged out. So today we did shooting and taking damage. So created a player shooting script, which allows a player to create a projectile that can destroy an enemy. I created bullets that fly forward and interact with game bounds and enemies. And then what else did we do? So we created a player shooting script, created a pooling script for the bullets, created enemy script which handles taking damage. And that's it for today, I believe. So let's press the commit and push it to the origin. And create a pull request. And we actually will be moving everything into our week 01. And we're going to merge and complete this like so. And this will be it for today. Tomorrow there's a lot of things to do, so I'll try to figure out what I would like to do next for this series. I want to start thinking about the theme soon, so we know what kind of a mechanics we will have within the project. But that's it for today.